Hi, I wanted to start by talking to you about the Kalam philosophical argument. Now, I know that half of you are already reaching for the YouTube equivalent of the off switch even as I speak. It's no surprise, mention a word like philosophy and 50% of the population instantaneously develop a blinding headache. Stick in a word like Kalam, a word that 99.9% of people have probably never heard of before, and well, the prognosis for that blinding headache, I will admit, gets a little worse. Now, of course, there are those of you who are thinking, yeah, well, philosophy, I can do philosophy, schmolosophy, but I thought this was about science. Well, hold your horses, I will get there, and for the benefit of those of you who have a blinding headache, I'll try and keep the philosophy as simple as possible. If you're anything like me though, you might want to reach for the paracetamol though, just in case, because I forgot to mention the Kalam philosophical argument does throw in a touch, just a touch, of mathematics as well. Yeah, sorry. The Kalam argument was initially wielded by Christian and later Islamic philosophers in order to prove against the general Aristotelian consensus that the universe in fact had a beginning. The first premise of the argument, or step if you will, is something that we all take for granted, something which we see demonstrated time and time again in the world around us, and it is this: whatever has a beginning has a cause. William Lane Craig put it like this. He says, "This is a principle that is constantly affirmed and never falsified. We never see things coming into being uncaused out of nothing. Nobody worries that while he's away at work, a horse might pop into being uncaused out of nothing in his living room and be there defiling his carpet." The second step was this: the universe itself had a beginning. Now, this was a little more difficult to prove, and this is where the maths comes in. If you remember, the general consensus, which I mentioned came from Aristotle, was that the universe was eternal. This meant that the past was an infinite stretch of time containing an infinite number of events. Now, in order to prove that the universe must have had a beginning, Christian and later Islamic philosophers resorted to maths to point out the actual impossibility of an infinite number of events stretching back in time. The maths went a little bit like this. Suppose you had an infinite number of stripy pyjamas, and you felt sorry for me because I didn't have any, and you wanted to give me out of your infinite multitude an infinite number of stripy pyjamas. Okay, so essentially the sum that we have here is this: what is infinity minus infinity? How many stripy pyjamas would you have left? Now, feel free to pause the video here and figure it out if you want to. Now, of course, some of you will say, well, I've given you all my stripy pyjamas, haven't I? An infinite number, so I'll have none left. And, yeah, that would be true. But maybe others of you would come to me and say, well, actually, I have worked out a win-win situation. I can give you an infinite number of stripy pyjamas, and I will still have an infinite number left. All I have to do is give you my odd-numbered ones, and I'll keep the even-numbered ones to myself. And, yeah, that would be true too. Still, a third group of you might come back and say, well, I'm not all that keen on keeping an infinite number of stripy pyjamas for myself, but I do want to hang on to a few, because, you know, I don't actually hate them. Suppose I number my stripy pyjamas 1 to 7 and give you all the pyjamas from 7 upwards. That way, you could have an infinite number, but I would get to keep 7 of them. And yes, that would be yet another accurate solution. So what's the conclusion here? You can see infinity minus infinity can equal nothing. It can equal infinity, and it can equal 7, or indeed any other number that you choose. Infinity is just a concept, nothing more, nothing less. It does not and cannot exist in the physical world. You cannot have an infinite number of past events, because, as was the case with stripy pyjamas, you end up with all sorts of contradictions and paradoxes. So mathematics leads us to the conclusion, which is the second premise of the Kalam philosophical argument, that the universe must have had a beginning. That leads us nicely on to the third step in the Kalam argument. If everything that had a beginning had a cause, if the universe had a beginning, therefore, step 3, the universe must have a cause. So against Aristotelian philosophy, Christian and Muslim philosophers argued that the universe was created by God. He was the first cause of a universe that had existed for a finite amount of time. Well, philosophy and maths over with for now. But why in a series about science bring it up in the first place? Well, one of the things it does is demonstrate that science is not the only path to knowledge. Whatever you think about their conclusions regarding God, through philosophy and through maths, human beings had arrived at knowledge about the finite nature of the universe long before science was able to do so. In fact, the general consensus right up until the early part of the 20th century was in line with Aristotelian philosophy. And it was wrong. In 1908, state Krauss and Scherer, the scientific consensus was that the universe was static and eternal. The beginning of the universe in a fiery Big Bang was not even remotely suspected. Of course, now it's mainstream science. The artillery of science in the 20th century, the big theoretical guns of Einstein, Friedemann Lemaitre, George Gamow, together with the empirical ammunition in the form of discoveries made by Edwin Hubble, Slipher, Penzias and Wilson and others, has blown the belief of an eternal universe with an infinite past right out of the water. Let's talk then about the Big Bang. And let me tell you why I believe it points to the existence of a creator of our universe.